The systems are designed for the data and not for the people. You need all the information in order to create a contract. You have to have it. That is the data that you need to collect. That's where we already see running in production in our customers with the AI front door can do so much of the heavy lifting if you do feed it some of the context, some of the policies, and let a person just say what they need.
Abstract is brought to you by Spotdraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, Spotdraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, Spotdraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. Spotdraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at spotdraft.com. How can legal and business teams work better together? What's the role of technology? What's it like to build a tech company that serves legal professionals, and where is the industry headed? Today, we're joined by Sagi Eliyahu, founder and CEO of Tonkean, which simplifies complex enterprise-level business challenges with a particular focus on legal process orchestration and intake. And we're going to get his definition of both of those terms. This is also a special episode because it's the first time that I'm joined by a co-host, my friend and colleague now at Spotdraft, Akshay Verma, who is our COO. He's got a background in legal ops himself as the former head of legal ops at both Coinbase and at Meta. Akshay has also been on the Abstract once before, back in season 1, prior to joining Spotdraft. Thank you both for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I get to be a co-host, and that changes the entire approach here.
Yeah.
Now it's 2 against 1 on the other side.
Well, 2 on 1. Okay, sports. That's a good place to start. Did you like that transition, Akshay?
Very nice. I teed it up for you. Softball.
Something that all three of us have in common, actually, is that we are all 49ers fans. I think the two of you might be even slightly more dedicated than I am. How did you follow the draft? How do you think they're positioned for next season?
Well, to be honest, Akshay is the true number one fan. I'm a newer fan, although, as you can tell from my professional life, I'm all in when I'm into something. So definitely became like a religious fan in the last probably 5 years. Yeah, so draft, look, honestly, it's end of quarter for us, so I wasn't as in tune as I usually is, but I was mostly worried about them not trading away our good friends in the wide receivers. But other than that, it looked like it was good. But I'm actually curious what you think, actually.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like we certainly connected over legal ops and legal technology stuff. But like, I don't know if it was at the conference last year, but like, I was really impressed at someone who came to this country so late in his life to be such a diehard American football fan. Like, American football is not a global sport by any stretch of the imagination. So I was just really impressed with his depth of knowledge. So yeah, we connected over that. In fact, that was on a Thursday. There was a Thursday night game that night. It was Niners Giants, and the conference had set up the ballroom so that we could stream the game. And so there was probably about 15, 20 of us after the conference was done. They got to watch the game, and we spent some time together. Yeah, like I wasn't terribly concerned. I didn't think they were going to trade anybody. It's just this group is too good to keep together for one more year when financially you don't have to trade anyone away. It's a business. Like we're going to be talking about business in a minute here. Like the NFL is a business, teams are a business. You combine that too much with emotions and you get yourself into trouble. So, but that being said, I didn't think it made any business sense to trade them away. But as you look at the draft, and I think there's so many analogies here for us, they're both going to be playing for the present, as in like win now. They have the roster to do it, but also simultaneously prepare for the future when key pieces of that roster will be gone. It's not a question of if, but when they'll be gone, and how do you replace those pieces? How do you keep continuity? What are the key pieces that you're not willing to let go of? I mean, those are all business decisions
Mm-hmm.
that the front office make with our head coach. And I think there's so many analogies to that in starting a business, building a business, running a business. So I will always say that sports are like the ultimate analogy for life. And if you don't like sports, fine. I think you can still understand the analogies.
No, absolutely, I completely agree, and I think the probably on the personal level, the pain of last year is also something that you can relate to. It's
Yeah, you lose a big deal either to a competitor or like something happens that you're right there, you're right at the finish line. We've all felt that. I felt that way too many times in my career. And yeah, it hurts, but then you learn from it. And like again, like I'll draw the analogy.
Mm-hmm.
They took some of the learning lessons from the Super Bowl loss, and that's part of how they drafted the players that they drafted. Not to get too technical, but our receivers could not get off of press coverage. Like they couldn't get open in the Super Bowl. That was hard. Now they've got some guys who can maybe do that. So we'll see if it helps.
Going back to something that you alluded to earlier, Akshay, that the two of you also have in common is the sort of immigrant experience. When you were saying you were impressed that Sagi, picked up becoming a huge sports fan, American football fan, later in life, and I'd really like to explore how that's shaped how you think about doing business, how you think about building a business, sort of from nothing in the case of Tonkean. Sagi, why don't we start? Can you tell us your story? Tell us why you decided to come here and how you decided to start a business.
yeah. Well, I think honestly, maybe to tie even back to the last point real quick, I think the reason I got so much into American football, by the way, is partially because it's so much similar to business. I felt so.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up actually. So I grew up in Israel,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in Israel, we follow what we call the real football, right? Which is you know, what American it would call soccer, right? And so, which I loved, and I was I'm was all my life I was a very diehard sports fan. I would be 10-year-old, go to like Haifa, which is a city up north, which
Mm-hmm.
is an hour away from where I grew up, but was the biggest sort of like city in proximity. And I was just a diehard fan. I would go every weekend to the field and watch the game with the loudest group of people. And yeah, when I moved here, I kind of learned the game of American football, and what I really was kind of drawn to is the combination of strategy and tactic and
Mm-hmm.
teamwork, but also individual genius talent. And that to me is like the kind of the perfect combination of what you need to do, and also like how well adjusted it is to be able to put ads in, which is just from a business model, you appreciate. But no, back to your kind of main question. Yeah, so I moved here honestly, funny enough, on a whim actually. So I was in my previous company. I was part of a very small startup that got acquired by an American company. They wanted to start an R&D center in Israel after they acquired us, and
Mm-hmm.
I was running engineering, so I had the opportunity to build an R&D site in Israel. So I grew the team there for a few hundred people, and then I moved. They offered me to move here to the Bay Area, and I said on a week because I was actually here every 5 weeks or so. But then the CEO and I was with the executive staff back then, but I was only managing the Israeli team. So they
Mm-hmm.
suggested, hey, why don't you come here and take over a bigger role and kind of be part of the official, and there was a public company, so it was like a good opportunity. And I
Mm-hmm.
literally came with a suitcase. Like I did not think I will stay here. It was a 1 year type of thing, what I told myself. But I ended up after a year living and starting Tonkean, and we celebrated 9 years 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
So it's been a it's been a roller coaster and a great ride. But I think I always knew that in a way, I always knew I'm gonna end up here in
Mm-hmm.
some way, or from. I grew up on entrepreneurship. Whoever worked with Israelis tech industry, it's sort of like the startup nation type of thing. It's our idols are people that kind of build companies and
Mm-hmm.
in the tech industry, and Silicon Valley was like, the number one place to be. So honestly, if you'd ask, a young kid version of me, this would be a sort of like a dream versus like something that would be
Mhm.
practical. But as I got older and got into the workforce, it was almost like inevitable. My mom had tried to fight off, honestly, but for me it was kind of obvious.
Did you feel like as you were starting the business, and I'm also curious to hear from Akshay on this as well, just being in the Bay Area, being in tech, did you feel like your immigrant experience was an advantage, or did it create challenges, or was there a community that you felt that you could lean on? All of those things. Tell us a little bit about how that informed your journey.
Well, I think first of all, I do think there's a lot of the Venn diagram between an immigrant and entrepreneur actually is pretty high. You sort of like you have to be resourceful. You're coming into a space that you bring different perspective and experience to by
Hmm.
definition, but in a way you're trying to fit in, but in your own way. It's a weird basic parameters in which you sort of operate in.
Hmm.
Um, and in the same way though, you strive on being able to do that matching, so finding like what are you very good at and what is the ecosystem needs, and sort of
Hmm.
like how those match together. So I think, and by the way, and you're aiming at something bigger than what you had, and it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you came from a bad place. It's
Sure.
just might have been in a great place already, but your aspirations for one reason or another are bigger than where you came from, which kind of caused you. And of course, there are people that immigrate from unfortunate reasons, but
Of course.
obviously I'm focusing on immigration by choice kind of thing. And then when you think about the ecosystem or the support system, to your point, and whether people are there, I think this is something that is very special for the Silicon Valley. Was very clear even before the pandemic. I think it's coming back now, especially in the last year. I've been feeling it, but yeah, being able to connect with folks. For me personally, there's a lot of Israelis that move to the valley, so and they're always kind of there to help. And as you know, I'm trying to pay back the favors now too wherever I can. But honestly, you put enough people that are trying to make big things happen in the same place, they're just gonna push each other. So I think this is very special thing about here. But I think most of those hubs, that's why they create the renaissance, of the old, is like they're all gravitating into the same place because people there are gonna want the same thing, and so you start to kind of create this community.
Uh-huh.
It's been that way for 40 plus years. I'm coming up on my 40th year in this country. So I came here much earlier in my life. So I'm a little bit, I'd say I'm 1 degree removed from like the direct pick up your
Hmm.
life and move experience, because I came as a kid and that was my parents' experience more than it was mine, even though I was an immigrant. But it was like that back then. And my dad moved to this country with nothing, like literally nothing except his scholarship for his master's. And then he got a job at Intel in 1986, where like Silicon Valley, the H-1B program was exploding at that time in the United States.
Hmm.
And so he got a job at Intel, and like that's what the feeling was like here in the valley back then. It's 1986, almost 40 years ago, and there were communities of engineers mainly from different parts of the world. My parents had friends who were Israeli back then. They had friends who were Pakistani, certainly Indian, Korean, Japanese, like you name it. Like the best engineers in the world were coming here because the companies were paying for them to come study, move, do all those things. And there was just like this incredible energy. It's never really left. It's changed, but it
Hmm.
hasn't really left. And that's where like your point around like when you have a locus of energy and focus like that in this area, really cool things are going to happen. There's plenty of downside too. Like we're not I don't need to get into that in this podcast, but there's some really, really cool shit that happens. And I don't think that's left. On the immigrant side, like I do think it's an advantage. There's disadvantages, but I'm an optimist. I'll always look at the fact that you're almost always hungrier. You're always been the underdog. You've always faced adversity in some level, and I don't mean like I had a bad day at school, but I mean systemic adversity. And it doesn't have to be racism, it can be a bunch of other things, but you're always used to pushing against that and fighting it and figuring out ways around it and through it, and just kind of relying on those instincts to navigate. I think those are great attributes for building
Hmm.
a company and building a business and growing it.
And starting a company isn't easy. When you started Tonkean, did you expect that you would be selling to legal someday? Like, tell us about
Do you
how
want
the
to be
product.
selling to
Do you,
legal?
tell us about how you
Sh-
got going
yeah.
and how you got to where you are now.
Short answer, no. I did not. I did not expect it. When someone says I have an idea, there's this sort of like uh, jokes that for you can have 1,000 ideas, but the work that it takes that most people underestimate. And I think young, and I was there too, but early stage entrepreneurs a lot of times really put a lot of weight on the idea.
Hmm.
And what I learned is the idea does not matter, but the point of view does.
Hmm.
And so I think there's the if I need to kind of like reframe the concept of I have an idea, by the time it will actually hit the market, it would have changed 10 times, right?
Hmm.
But one thing that is critical for every company that you've seen successful is like, what is the point of view that they have on a problem? And that I found, I'm very proud of that, through our 9 years now and 10 years, if you kind of count the time before I actually started the company, that I would start thinking about these problems. The point of view did not change. In fact, by every year that passes, I'm more and more confident about the point of view. What is actually, though, who are we serving? What are we serving them with? Have changed and refined. Honestly, and this is kind of like maybe saying the obvious, is 90% of the challenge is the timing. What are you coming with, and where's the market at? And so when we started talking, really the main concept and point of view we had was business processes are not about data, they're about people.
Hmm.
But 100% of software at that time, and close to 100% of it still today, is mainly focused on data. And this is not to say that the data is not important. Data is for a good reason getting a lot of, if not all, the attention. But my feeling was a lot of the work within big organization happens in that people layer, in where people need to coordinate with other people and across silos and inside the company and outside the company. And if you run this fast forward a little bit, a lot of the pain that people experience, feeling like they're wasting time, feeling like they're not working on important things, is when they waste time back and forth, miscommunication, inability, feeling like the politics and the red tape and the back office work is taking a lot of their, sort of like their ability to make an impact.
Hmm.
And so when we started the company, we knew that that gap is something that technology can help with, if you look at it from a slightly different point. And we can talk about the orchestration piece in a second. But
Hmm.
the legal is actually something that in the last, I want to say, probably 5 years, we started to focus on. And by the way, recently, also like 2 years ago, also started to focus also on procurement, which is a lot in common, actually more in common than I think both department things. First of all, both hate each other, which is,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but but they also share a lot of other things. But I just felt like, again, about 5 years ago, is that legal is so much centric to the running operation of a company, but also a lot of its impact is around working with different people that comes from different silos that have their own
Hmm.
priority, own dependencies. And so in many ways that human centric process was a lot more obvious in legal. And that's kind of like how we start to work with legal. And then since we obviously created a lot more depth in our understanding of that market. But and then the market, understanding of kind of like our value. But this is not, when I started the company, I didn't say, oh, I didn't know anything about legal, to be frank, right? It was maybe as a user of it, definitely when I started the company, you interact with a lot of legal, processes and compliance stuff. But as a solution or a problem area, it was mostly, hey, this is actually sounds like what I felt is missing is heightened in this area of enterprises. And then since then, again, 5 years ago, that's quite a lot of experience by now. But back then it was completely greenfield, and we immediately saw that we were making a difference.
Mm-hmm. I think that's refreshing, probably for a lot of our listeners to hear as a starting viewpoint, which, is to say they often speak to technology vendors, and I would throw, CLM systems or solutions in there as well, and it's all about the tech as opposed to about the people and process and maybe policies, et cetera, that are actually going to enable the tech to work or enable you to extract that key insight from the great data set that you're now going to have. Maybe that's orchestration, but define process orchestration for us. And I also want you to you corrected me when we were preparing for this, and you said you view process orchestration as being different than process automation. Tell us a little bit about how those two things connote something different or are really substantively different.
Yeah. So first thing first, orchestration is something I have been using since 9 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And as much as it is still not fully understood, 9 years ago, no one understood what I want from their dear life, including the VC community or whatever you want. It was like, what are you saying? Orchestration? What do you mean? Like what does it mean? But it is to me the idea of an orchestra where you have different instruments and they have different roles, and they can sound really good by themselves. But if you trying to put them together, you need something to actually align them so the music, would work. And the music sheet might be the policy or the process, but it's still gonna sound, choose your favorite curse word, unless there's an orchestrator again in a big orchestra. So so this is kind of where the idea for the phrase, or I should say embracing that phrase as the main phrase, came from. I think but it's a similar idea. So when you think about automation, to me, a lot of people, when they think about process automation, they really just talk about process digitalization. So like just making it digital versus being manual. That is not actual automation. It is a beginning of automation. It's what enable you to automate. But automating is really taking something manual and making it not manual. So basically delegating the work of any task to a machine. That in my book would be automation. That would be automating it. Orchestration. So if you think about a factory floor, for example, that used to be 100% tables of manual people. If you take one table, if someone that, I don't know, put caps on a bottle, and then you build a machine that does that, you automated that task. Orchestration is not any of those machines, it's the assembly line. It's essentially to say, how do I move the entire process along through those different deep technologies or big machine in a factory, so the end to end of it makes sense, sings together, right? The music play. And that's why, for example, when I think about CLMs, if we kind of focus on the legal area, for example, CLMs and the e-billings and the e-discovery, all that stuff, that's not never what we want to do. Now, do we handle contracts sometimes, or sorry, process that relates to contracts? Of course, that's like what legal is work. But are we the one that would actually do the red line for a contract or handle the life cycle of the contract itself? Not necessarily. What we're trying to be is essentially sit on top and say, where do requests even come in for a contract? What happened when the contract completes? And how do you sort of think about that machine in all of its complexity as part of the bigger, wider, not even bigger, just like wider, longer, end-to-end sort of workflow. And so that's why we partner so well, by the way, with a lot of those vendors. But this is also where it's kind of sometimes confusing. This is where it leads me to that idea of intake, which is something that also we started to talk about 5 years ago, essentially, with when we started to work with legal, and became more commonly used now, but which is just essentially trying to describe a version of that assembly line in which people requesting something from a different team. So one team requesting something from another team, then there's a handoff process there that is rarely managed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you think about the factory floor, it makes sense. You work so hard to create this perfect machine to do this job. You assume that the people that were there, instead of 10 people, now you only need one person to take it and put it into the machine. But that is still intake. And when you start to scale that, that's the next thing that is going to break. And so again, when you really think about what assembly line does, is moving things from one machine to the next machine, and then from that machine to maybe a person, and then from that person back to that machine. And so everyone has an intake. If legal is dependent on procurement, or procurement is dependent on legal, and both of them are dependent on IT, and so on, each of them is actually experiencing an intake from the other one.
Uh-huh.
But they each have their own priorities and their own policies, and everyone is urgent. So it's like it's really about orchestrating those dependencies and then extracting the most out of those machines and investments that you made, and make it all kind of syncs together.
I love that visualization. Actually, you've been in the legal ops space for a while and really seen it grown up and have also done it at very large organizations that have both used outside tech and also built a lot internally. Do you feel like this concept of orchestration is widely understood or accepted, or does that still need to be embraced?
No, I think the bar is so low for improvement, which is why legal technology is such a fun place to play in. Sagi mentioned that they kind of fell into legal a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think my take on that is it was actually the lowest bar to overcome in terms of sophistication and need and pain, and those are often the easiest problems to solve up front. I also think it has the largest opportunity for growth in all of these areas. Yeah, like Facebook would have benefited significantly from this kind of thing because it was a massive department. By the time I left, Facebook was 2,000 people in the legal department, all
Mm-hmm.
running around doing different things and not talking to each other, and different systems and homegrown stuff and on-prem and some in the cloud. And what does this do? And there was even like, oh, I didn't even know we had this, right? Like when you get that big, like it's not even does the left hand talk to the right hand, it's the left hand does not know that the right hand exists. Like it gets to be that kind of a situation. So I think conceptually I don't think I've heard you talk about the word orchestration before in our conversations. That to me, it's a really really relevant visual for what Tonkean does, and like the benefit of this. But where it kind of hits home for me is all these different teams have different policies and procedures on how they need things done.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them are actually incongruent, but they don't know it. And imagine if you could tie all of that together. Like I don't know if seamless is the right word or not, but a lot better than what it currently is. And I know we're talking in the abstract. Like I'd love to hear like a specific like example or use case, Sagi, where you kind of have worked with a customer or a set of tools to kind of tie these pieces together to create the orchestra.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you kind of mentioned the challenges you've seen in Meta, and funny enough, we saw almost immediately how much more early adopters to this type of technology big enterprises are, which is usually the opposite, right? And so even from being very early stage, and still today is our pride, is just the massive logos that we have,
Yeah.
right? Anyone can go to our website and see the flashiness of them,
Yeah.
but it's really like the biggest tech companies, the biggest financial companies, the biggest even government contract. Like it's really the bigger they are, the more obvious it is. To your question about how much the market kind of is ready for this, the more obvious it is. That's not to say that we can't help smaller companies, but smaller companies are usually needs to be more strategic thinkers to actually say, oh, we should invest in this now,
Yeah.
versus
Mm-hmm.
when it's too late, or not too late, but so like or you already kind of felt the pain. I think the most concrete example to me does come back to that concept of an intake. When you think about the simplest way for a legal team to start working with, creating their policies and start working with departments, is they create some sort of a portal, right? And in that portal, they'll put some links together. And at the beginning, when they're smaller, maybe it's fine. But then, things start to get complicated. So they start investing in those machines. So they'll buy, Spotdraft, or they'll buy, an e-billing system, or they'll buy this or that. And now they want to funnel people into their technology. What do you do? So you put another page in the portal and say, no, click on that link when you need this thing, but click on that link when you need this other thing. And then what happens if there's stakeholders within that process that are not the ones starting the process, but you need, in certain cases, actually FP&A to say, yep, no, we approve that, you can go ahead and do your part of it. Or you want to get a new law firm to work with you, and now you need to do to use other approvals or such. So you're in a position where the process itself still happens over email, and still happen over maybe Slack and Microsoft Teams, but really truly over email. and it's not managed anywhere. And so when you think about the matter management tooling that exists for legal, they also are very much specific into the world of, I need to bill hours for this, versus the fact that, wait, there's actually so much back and forth that happens, and whether this even needs to be a matter. Maybe just an FAQ, maybe someone just asking a question, hey, should I even talk to legal about this, or do I need a legal advice? Like, what's even the point of the starting point here? So this is probably the most common way for us to start, is essentially sits on top of all those different intake sources, places where people can come and talk to legal, and either consolidate them. So some companies decide, I actually want them to only start from one front door. And that's where, we can come in with some of our cool AI technology, but more often than not, that is just not as realistic, because as much as you'll put a pretty door, people are still going to email legal@company.com. People are still going to send physical letters, which is another big use case from a mailroom perspective. So Tonkean basically can connect to your legal inbox, can connect to the SharePoint forms that you have, or replace the SharePoint form with a Tonkean form, can connect to the mailroom, maybe the G Drive or SharePoint, whatever the actual file's in, and then do the analysis of what is this request and where does it need to go, and then say, oh, that's actually a contract request. Okay, let's kick off a CLM process. Oh, this is actually an FAQ request. I don't even want to create a matter for that. Let me try to pull it from a policy, just answer it, and bring it back. Funny enough, that's already exists, that concept, when you think about customer support. You have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, those type of things. Legal is a customer support function.
Don't tell them that. Don't tell
Well,
them that.
that's the point. But actually, it is important for them to know that they have that part of their job, but they are not staffed for it.
Yeah.
Right? They're not staffed for it from a research perspective, but also not from a methodologies perspective. So now they're trying to do their work, but 50% of their time, sometimes, even if you want to be kind of like optimistic, 15 or 20% of your time you're spending on basically doing tier 1 support. No sane person that has an engineering team would make their engineering team be a tier 1 support. They would never do any real job. But that's essentially what happens for legal. There are the tier 1 support and the tier 3 and the experts and everything in between. And so it doesn't make any sense. And so, this is probably the most common place where we start. And then you can get a lot more complicated than that, because the downstream orchestration is also real. So you sign the contract in the CLM. What happens then? Literally, what happens then from a company policy perspective? What do you want to happen? If it's a commercial contract, what do you want to happen? If it's an employee contract, what do you want to happen? If it's a litigation problem, what do you want to like? That can actually yield different downstream effect, and we do a lot of those too. But those are harder to imagine for many folks, versus the sort of like customer support example is much easier to grasp, and that's usually where we start from.
The front end. So think of it like the old school operator, the switchboard
Yeah,
for telephones, right? Like they're moving the pieces left and right and connecting the dots.
exactly. And then that's where you start. And then if you are truly connected there, because we are integrating with everything, we are now, let's say again, we took that request, put it in a CLM. We at that point hand it off there. But the point of orchestrator and the difference between an integrator and an orchestrator is that we're shepherding this in the background until it's done or as things change. Because you might say, like, if this is stuck on a certain step in the CLM for more than 2 weeks, or I don't know, whatever the business logic is, maybe you want to ping back whoever started it. Maybe you want to escalate it. Maybe you want to create a ticket somewhere, whatever it is. And
Mhm.
again, they have those policies. Every company has those policies, but they're on paper in a Word doc,
Mhm.
of like 60 pages that no one really knows kind of what to do about them. Which again comes back to the difference between orchestration and automation. This is about what is the logic versus sort of like what are the tasks to automate. We very very clearly tell some customers, like, look, I don't actually think what you need is Tonkean. I think what you need first is to have, first of all, a policy of what you want to do, and then you should have some basic tooling for you to do your job, and then now let's talk about how your job is integrated and connected to the rest of the organization, and that's when you need the orchestration, right?
We've experienced that too. I think even more so today, we think that making sure that customers are ready for technology or ready for a system is maybe the most important step. Quick announcement before I let you get back to the episode. Spotdraft just released our annual compensation report for in house legal professionals. If you're wondering how your compensation compares to your peers across industries, years of experience, and more, make sure to check it out. Find it at salary-report.spotdraft.com or head to the link in the description. Now, let's get back to the episode. You brought up the word AI or the term AI, the letters AI. And we can't have you on the podcast without talking about that. I think that Akshay and I have, I don't think I'd call it a contrarian view, but I think we have a pragmatic view around what we think that maybe like more traditional machine learning tech that we use can do today and what it can do well and what generative can do today and how it can be helpful, but probably not a full replacement for thinking, judging human beings. We think that checking outputs is super important and try to design workflows and systems to prompt that sort of check or judgment. I'm curious how you think about AI in the context of this orchestration. Because I'm sure it could be very helpful, but you also probably don't want to say take all of your company's policies and put them into a system and let the AI write the whole orchestration process. Yeah, how are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I'm from the way you describe it, we might actually be very aligned on the way we think about it. I also think about it in a very, I think, pragmatic way. To me, this is just the latest iteration of technology. I think it is can do incredible things, but I think internet was incredible too, and I think iPhone was incredible too. And when I think about and obviously AI, everyone are like now but like everyone that has been in the industry know that AI has been existing for like 40 years now. It's really just that the large language models have made their big breakthrough in the last what is it now, couple of years now, or even or probably less,
About a year and a
a
half.
year and a
Yeah.
half.
Yeah.
To me, when that's and this might be like a very my tech friends are probably gonna laugh at that, but I see it as an iteration of almost like regular expressions like regex in a very kind of like dumbed down way. It is orders of magnitude stronger, but from a utility perspective, it is the ability to really understand and manipulate text, especially specifically generative AI. Obviously, when you apply it on video and audio, that it kind of creates some other craziness.
Mhm.
But specifically for our world, the biggest leverage here is better understanding people, and this is, I think, This is how I think about it as a tool. There is, and it actually perfectly aligned with, I've never would imagine that that's how we're gonna get there.
Hmm.
I'm very honest, but this is essentially kind of like the gap I think I felt again 9 years ago, where I felt that the systems are designed for the data and not for the people. What I mean by that, you want to have it, you need all the information in order to create a contract. You have to have it. That is the data that you need to do, that you need to collect. So how do we design systems today? We design them as a form. Here are the fields that I need. You, person, transpose your thought into those fields so I can run the process. Where
Mhm.
LLMs, and that's where we already see running in production in our customers with the AI front door, can do so much of the heavy lifting if you do feed it some of the context, some of the policies, and then let a person, by the way, not even knowing just because they're just sending an email, but let a person just say what they need. Hey, I have this issue and I have this problem, and I can now, better than before, but you could have done it before too. We had something we call training set, so we kind of did it, part of it, but it's like, again, it was orders of magnitude worse than what LLM can do,
Mhm.
um, which is being able to say, oh, what you want to do is this. And wait a second, this thing requires 10 fields. I, as the LLM, can actually pre fill five of them already just by what you told me. And now I can ask you a couple more questions and then kick off the process in Spotdraft because I now already have all the information I needed in like a 2 second thing, because it makes some of those assumptions. Of course, the person needs to review, and so I think to your second part of the
Mhm.
guardrails, I think about it in two ways. I think about it in no one, like literally when you go to Starbucks and you order coffee, they will repeat to you what they heard. Oh,
Yeah.
so you want a tall latte with almond milk? No, not almond milk, oat milk. Oh, okay. I get it. That's fine. So like no one actually trusts even people to just go and do something, so you got to have that review mechanism. And if you don't have it, you're just bad at your job. It has nothing to do with the technology. Now, the second part of it though is, and this is something that, this is a very specific way of how we think about orchestration, but even automation, is that, again, if you compare everything to people, it's easier. Even if you hire an intern and you give them a job, you're not gonna give them access to the kingdom, to an intern, right? You're gonna create the playground for them to be creative, to do the job, and ideally it will be actually hands off, but within the scope of that task, right? I don't know, something dumb, but like, I don't know, go scrape LinkedIn and put it in a spreadsheet, right? Whatever.
Mhm.
Like, you're gonna give them access to that, but you're not gonna give them access to the CEO necessarily LinkedIn, right? That's just like too much of a risk.
Mhm.
It's just something that that again, if you're smart about it, if you're a small company, maybe you'll do it, but if you actually need to be compliant and all that stuff, you won't. And so I think the way we think about where AI can help, more than what I already discussed, which is understanding people, there are a lot of gray areas and fat in between steps. It's an overkill to actually codify them, but the main sort of like structure of what needs to happen, when the hard coded sort of like policies, those needs to be coded. Like, I don't think those make sense. Um, Not everyone has billions of recorded video hours like Tesla has for auto drive, that can go in, and I don't know how much of you guys are in tune with their stuff, where they moved from having partial neural net and partial hard coded stuff to full neural net. But I really think that only can happen when the structure of what is good and what is bad is very clear. And I
Mhm.
think in most companies, there's just not enough data for this to be true. There's not enough data to say this is good action to take, this is bad action, without having some of those ground rules implemented there. So I think for many, many years, I think, at least internally, for how processes happen, it will be a combination of the two. And so I
Mhm.
still think about it as, again, back to my factory floor example, as not as a new cool machine or a new cool technology that will allow machines to work much better than they worked before, versus a fundamental shift of of how things would be done. And therefore, that's where like people are like, oh, our jobs are gonna be taken away, blah 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 blah. Like this is literally like you got people need to learn history a little bit better. But like, it's just like it repeats itself every time, like literally every time. Every 5 years there's something that people jobs are gonna take away, and then really in the bottom line, jobs are roles might change, and of course some people will lose their job, but it's not because of the technologies, because maybe they didn't, you know they took it for granted and they didn't understand that, like, look, change is inevitable and you need to adjust to it and adapt to it, and it's just one-on-one Darwinism.
I think people do a lot of things out of fear, and lawyers especially, where this is a big topic of conversation. I see it on LinkedIn like every other day.
Mhm.
Oh, AI is going to replace lawyers. The hell it is. It might replace the lawyers who aren't actually doing lawyering work, and there's a lot of that. That's not their fault. That's the legal profession, that's legal departments, that's law firms. that that's those are the culprits there. So how you do things will change. You said something which is really interesting around, you use the analogy of driving, autonomous driving, and it
Mhm.
requires immense amount of data. But that's what judgment is. Human judgment is not inherent. It's based on data. I will do this because of my past experience and the thing that's in front of me and all of these different data points. And we say it's good judgment, not because of the decision that's made, but because of the outcome. It's only good judgment if the outcome is good for that situation. It's not because of
Mhm.
the decision that was made. So to me, that's where like AI is no different. It's a surrogate for human decision making with significant limitations, except that it has massive faults in the outcome right now because it doesn't have enough data.
Mhm.
So when do we get to a place where there is enough data in these things? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if we continue, here's where I differ, I think, in my worldview on this. I think some things take long to change, and some things just have to change. So if we take Tesla, for example, because, and you have like all of these training sets into how to ride a road, right,
Mhm.
and be autonomous driving. But then the same CEO and founder actually end up, you know, building a different way of transportation. That data would be useful, but it won't be enough. So
Yep.
now you would need to have a different kind of modification on that data set, and change it. I think the corporate world, even in big companies, is changing too often, and the policies decisions does not change much faster than what laws of the road of traffic are. And so it's not even the judgment is has so much corporate context to it sometimes,
Hmm.
that it's like the data set is it become a foundation layer. And this is why I think you don't even need to wait for it. In a way, I think you can actually extract a lot of value from LLMs today because they know English, but in or many other language, but like, let's to focus on English. And then the rest of it, you sort of like need to be specific and kind of guide it and prompt it, or kind of have additional training, but that even not as common. So I actually think in one way, so I'm kind of like saying, I'm giving both answers. So in one way, I actually think we have enough data
Yeah.
for it to be
Hmm.
to significantly improve the output of legal teams right now, like literally tomorrow. But I think the difference is, to me, is even just what the real role of such departments are, like legal, right? I don't, when I think about my console, and even the name of the name console is, I don't need them to review an NDA.
Yeah.
That's just a waste of time.
Yep.
I also don't need them to review a massive MSA that is redline. As I obviously that's I prefer to do that than having them review an NDA. But I see that uh, goes lower and lower. Where I do need them is to actually have an advice and a strategic sort of thought that is not that data doesn't even exist
Yeah.
anymore. is just, is just someone that will have been with me
Yeah.
for the last 9 years
Yeah.
and knows also kind of like where I want to go as a company, and help me think through the risk. Main point here is think. So if I want to validate the risk, maybe I can talk to ChatGPT right now, and it will have the knowledge to give me answers. But I still need to come up with the questions.
If
I need
you
to,
ask ChatGPT, what should I do?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that would be nonsense,
Absolutely.
right? If I ask specific questions like, "Hey, what happens when this happens and this happens, and how likely it is to happen?" then it will, blurb something that I can learn from.
Yeah.
But and it might be better. By the way, I have my own thought about when is it better than a search interface versus a chat interface. It's not always
Yeah.
true. Sometimes it might be better than a search interface. Sometimes it actually would be worse. But either way, it is a great tool to extract, information, but not necessarily, to go about that advice piece. Now, I'm not saying that you can't, right? You can hook it to your brain eventually, and then have that context, or hook it to record all of your calls over the years and all that. Like on the theory level, it can happen, but on the practical level, I don't know. I don't want to talk to Siri or Alexa on a public space, no matter what. I mean, I just don't want to do it. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I also don't want it to. I just don't want it to be. I don't want to record every call that I have in the company. We use recording, tools, and we use it a lot actually. But still, there's some, that I just don't want to do it, right? And I think legal would understand it the most, right? There's
Sure.
a reason why you
Yeah.
put retention on data. So like, there's a counterintuitive here of like where's the how can you make that work well. So I think, but I think it's a positive thing, because I think people need to, the goal of technology is to take away, like, literally the first technology, you take a stone, like a monkey take a stone and break a coconut, right? Like, why do you do that? Like, what's the value of that? Well, it creates leverage for you. You get more force out of it, but you also don't break your wrist.
Yeah.
It's like you take the stuff that are painful and you don't want to do, and you create leverage out of them. And any technology can be on that same scale. And I think what people misunderstand is that you are gonna stop doing something. If you want to enjoy the leverage, it means you're gonna stop doing something that you did before. What are you gonna do with that time? What are you gonna do with that energy that you saved? Are you gonna break more coconuts than the one that it took you to do before? Maybe you break four, and so now you can, have a family. I'm making things up, but you know what I mean. It's like it's a matter of like leverage, and so I think a good advice for people listening in, especially in legal, is just to stop with the conversation of whether it's going to happen or not. Like, it's definitely going to happen, because as a consumer of legal services, I don't want to pay for an NDA, for checking an NDA. I just don't want to do it.
It still
Is
happens way too much.
you know
It still
no, it does, exactly. But that is the transition that people needs to do, and start instead building the skill set. If they don't feel comfortable that they have the skill set, they do have time to build those skill set. But not if they wait 2, 3, 4 more years, because then it will be too
Yeah.
late.
I think part of the problem is people think of their roles often as a set of tasks and not
Yeah.
impact.
Yeah.
And AI, like any other tool, technology, is going to replace tasks.
Hmm.
But that is not your job. That is not your career. That's not your role. Those are things that you do.
Exactly.
And we are human beings. We have the capacity to learn new skills. We call it upskilling, upleveling, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
Anyone can do that. And I mean, this to me, this is the crux of legal operations anyway. Like, this is why we exist in the first place, is there are all these tasks across the legal department that are far too manual. They're a drain on the business. We don't talk about that enough. They're not just
Hmm.
a drain on the lawyers. They're not just a drain on the groups. They're not just a drain on the legal department. They're actually a drain on the business. And
Yeah.
the sooner
They're
you
not.
make that connection, you say, hey, we can remove, that's the number one lever, get rid of these tasks. We don't need to do these tasks anymore. Number two, here's an entire set of tasks. And the value chain here is getting higher and higher that we can now automate through whatever tool, technology, or process. Then it's like, hey, now we're getting closer to our core strategic work. This is fun. We've
Mm-hmm.
made our business better, and people are happier. Like
Yeah.
that's to me is like the paradise land for a legal department and a business. We are far, far away from that still,
Yeah.
even with AI that's here right now.
I think you said something that I think is actually, I want to double click on even further, the remove part. There's a funny, to me it's funny because it's very visual example actually in the finance and procurement world, but I think it's applicable here as well in the legal world, and I think everyone should think about what is that equivalent. So I call it the RFP conundrum. If you have AI, so everyone hate RFP. People hate create it, people hate filling it. If you have an
Wait.
AI, yeah, if you have an AI that creates an RFP and then an AI that answers the RFP, do you even need an RFP? You know, like what is that? What the point? And I think that's important because for the next immediate future, that's what will happen. You will have an AI that creates an RFP, an AI that fill the RFP, and then an AI that score the RFP.
Yeah,
But then not far after that, someone will come and say, "This is all kind of dumb, and so let's have something different that is better." And essentially, this process needs to be removed. And so, if you are hanging on to the fact that, well, right now it's pretty hard to, I'm making this part up, but like if you are like, oh, it's too hard to create an RFP right now, so but then that kind of automated away, and then like, oh, but well, it's pretty hard to validate an RFP, and that um, you're looking at the wrong way. Like the question is RFP as a concept is a construct of our limitation, or is it actually create an actual value? And in the RFP example, I believe it is, you want to source from different vendors, you need a way to get all the information,
absolutely.
right? And so it's a construct of, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough, so we're trying to normalize the information. That is a solvable problem. This is not something that is core to any business. It's a way to transfer information. So like, what are the equivalent? And there are a lot of them. And what will remain, on the extremes. I think this is something that I didn't come up with. This It's pretty I think well known, but I really registered to, is thinking about things in the extremes. Like if everything is like zero, if everything is 100, how does the situation looks like at that point? And that would give you a good idea of the play field. Like if everyone using AI for everything, or if no one is using it for nothing in a
Mm-hmm.
specific area, what does that look? What does that look like? And I think you start imagining, okay, that would mean this and this and this. What it will mean on my job if I'm the only one that is not doing it, or if I'm the only one that is doing it, and so on. So yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's a privilege for everyone, honestly, being in that place in time. I think it's exciting, but maybe it's the technologies in me.
There's amazing potential, right? It's not just about the technology. It's not just about AI. It's about, as Akshay was saying, the potential for what your work or what your
Yeah.
life could be. This has been such an insightful conversation. I've got a couple of, well, I hope they're fun questions for you as we start to wrap up. The first one is something I like to ask most guests, which is, like, I'm a big reader. Or is there anything interesting that you've read recently, book or similar, that you would recommend to our listeners?
So I actually mostly read biographies.
Cool.
Um, I find inspiration in people's struggles,
Mhm.
and how they overcome that. I hate the idea of a overnight success concept. It is, there is zero cases of that. 100% of the time, it's either your hard work or your parents' hard work, or like some, it is never like just like out of thin air. Lottery thing, by the way, if anyone wins the lottery, they usually lose it immediately after, because they can appreciate it, as well. So I think, so any literally any type of of biography. I just read the Elon Musk biography. I do recommend. I think that one specifically was a very in-depth one to like actually his childhood and other stuff, which again for me is interesting more than just the recent years, if you actually want to understand it. But you mentioned any other, like in Netflix, they nail down the doco series
Yeah.
thing from like the Formula One that is like a must watch, I believe. But yeah, all the way to they're now doing it for every sport, and I'm still holding my fingers back to the beginning of this conversation that they last year that they might have done one for Brock, but we'll see. They
Oh,
still haven't.
we need Brock to focus on the upcoming season.
No, I think last year. I think they already. My bet is they actually already
Filmed it.
filmed that last season. And so, but either way, yeah, I recommend the latest Elon Musk one.
If you like biographies, there's a great podcast called Founders. I don't know if you've heard it before. It takes the concept of founders very broadly, and the host reads biographies and then summarizes them for you in anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, 2 hours. But the interesting thing is then when you start to listen to more episodes, there's an interplay between them, right? Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
A last question for you, Sagi. I have a traditional sort of question that I ask pretty much everyone who comes on, and I'm going to frame it a little bit differently because you're not a lawyer, you're a founder, and maybe this is for the benefit of other hopeful founders, some of whom these days especially are former lawyers. You see that all the time. If you could look back on when you first started Tonkean, what's something that you wish you'd known then that you know now?
So I think that, we talked about the idea versus the point of view part. I think aside from that, I would say two things. One, it's a known fact, but it is, you gotta live through it to fully realize it, is that timing concept. It is, you cannot be, if you have again a new point of view or a new idea or something you want to build, you're by definition early. Like otherwise, if it's a common sense already, then it's not, there's nothing new there. So you're already coming with something new. So by definition, you are early to the market. The biggest important thing is like, how early are you? Are you early? Are you a year early, 3 years early, 10 years early, 20 years early, right? And people talk about product market fit. They talk about a bunch of things. I find all of them good for some things, but sometimes oversimplifying it to an operational level of what you kind of need to do. People talk to your customers early, but they don't talk about what you need to ask. And so I think, to me, that concept of, if you can try to focus on analyzing by talking to customers, by shipping early and fast stuff to, but what you're actually measuring is how far is your vision from the market is right now, and how long before this is going to be the norm. That would be a very helpful tool in your decision making arsenal, is what I think.
That's great. Well, Sagi and Akshay, thank you both so much for coming on and producing this first ever co-hosted episode of The Abstract.
See, we went easy on you, right?
No, that was fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning into this episode, and we hope to see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd recommend that you give my interview from earlier in the season with Jen McCarran, president of Clock and head of legal ops at Netflix, a listen. We talk about how legal ops professionals can leverage technology and where the legal ops profession is headed. You can also subscribe so you get notified as soon as we post a new episode. And if you liked this one, I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so leave a rating or a comment. If you'd like to reach out to us, our LinkedIn profiles are in the description. See you all next week.